this has been a controversial area at times, and we need to get together, because together we'll make a better job and we'll succeed. So the road ahead is the journey to survivorship hubs of excellence, and the success pathway, recovery pathway we launched last year. And this is about endocrine or hormone and neurological developmental injuries, because these children, as well as a brain tumor, and what we've forgotten is also have a brain injury. And that makes them very different from other children with cancers. The other thing is most of them are not cancers, but they get cancer treatment. And the outcomes that we measure are based on a cancer model, which is very non-flexible and rigid, and is based on 5-year survival. If you survive 5 years, you're cured. It doesn't tell you how you survive. Your tumor might still be there, you might still be on treatment, it might still be coming back, but that's a cure. And it's not actually a very good measure. Doesn't tell us anything. But when everyone is looking to improve childhood cancer outcomes, that's what they're looking at. And I'm going to show you why I don't think that's a very good measure. So last year, we launched the idea that alongside the decision treatment oncology pathway and the surgical pathway that you all know and have been familiar with and get streamlined, including going off to America and Disneyland for your protons, which the government kindly paid for, we need some funding on rehabilitation and assessing what the brain hormone system and the neurological system that children need to grow and develop. That's what makes us become adults. Those are the adults' things that we need to become the future person. From the beginning, for every child, assessed properly so that we can pick up subtle changes that we can then follow as they develop over the 4 key stages of development. And only then will we know what the tumors caused and what the treatments caused, and we will stop misattributing things to radiotherapy that actually belong to the tumor. And we will stop, and we will understand better which treatments really work. And I've also introduced the idea that where the tumor is matters, midbrain versus peripheral. And that's important because oncologists talk about cancer and its aggressivity. Developmentalists, hormone specialists, and neurodevelopmentalists talk about the location. Location, location, location. It matters for the brain, and it matters on this journey. So that was the beginning of what we started to think might be a rehabilitation assessment, complex assessment and rehabilitation team. It's up for debate. But at the moment, these people are not mandated at the start. And I believe that before we touch a child's brain tumor in future, the parents should know, and the surgeon would like, I suspect, to know that there's a recovery team to make his decisions and his wonderful surgery really the best. And we should do that throughout all the stages of development, because every mother knows, every parent knows, every teacher knows that if you haven't had your first steps at 1, if you don't have your first words at 3, if you're not potty trained by the time you go to school, if you haven't got into your 11 plus, you're losing against your peers. And those gaps accrue with time, and they're affected by hormones. And often you don't see the damage because you don't expect a 1-year-old to be able to plan their life, which only becomes evident in adolescence when there's a huge brain growth of the frontal brain. And by then it's too late to intervene. Why? Well, it's about time. We put this in the NICE guidance 20 years ago. I personally fought for it, so I know it's there. And it says rehabilitation should be there for every child with cancer, but especially those with brain tumors, because it works, it might be lifelong, and because it makes a difference. It was reiterated in 2014. We've had a cancer specification in 2022, but it's still not commissioned by trusts. And yet we've seen treatments expand hospitals running around trying to deliver chemotherapy. We've had oncologists expand 20-fold, and yet there's no rehabilitation service. And the government task force that's just been launched is looking at improving outcomes, but again, it's based on cure. For the 20% we still have to cure, with earlier diagnosis, genomic, molecular experimentation, new drugs and technologies, but no rehabilitation. And yet, health outcomes are important. It's how you live. And this is why, because in cancer survivors, and these are the common children's cancers, if you've had lymphoma or leukemia, the blood ones, and brain tumors come second, you come into hospital after you've survived, these are survivors, look at the hospital admission rates. You come back for your tumor, that's the orange, but 50% of the admissions in green, blue, and brown are due to hormone and neurological problems. And a small percent, right at the front in the pale blue, is mental health risk and suicide risk. And most of these carry a secondary life-threatening problem. We've just saved children from one life-threatening condition. Why are we not stopping to think we're creating another and looking at that? It just doesn't make sense. And if you don't believe me, I finally, in the new cancer registries that have only been available for 20 years, and they're just beginning to be maturing enough, you'll see that if you separate out, all cancers, the survival rate is 80% for brain tumors at 5 years now, and 90% for all cancers combined. 9 in every 10 cancers, 8 in every 10 brain tumors we are deeming cured. Why aren't we spending more money on making sure that cure is a real cure? And it hasn't, I dare say, changed much in the last 15 to 20 years, despite all the millions that we've poured at it. So that to me says either the outcome's wrong or the treatment's not doing anything. Quite a controversial statement, but I'm making it. And here you are, if you separate the tumors, these are the cancers, the medulloblastoma, ependymomas, there are others, and that's where oncologists started, and there has been some impact, but not as much as one might hope, if you look at the red and the black lines, but particularly in the surgical disease on the right, ependymomas. And these other cancers that I've boxed in at the bottom, they're cancers, but they're cancers of the deep midbrain, of the pituitary and suprasellar area. And look, they've always had high survival, always. And that seems to be a predilection of the brain. And what I would say is that these may be heralded 20 years earlier. If we're going to diagnose them earlier, which is what we want, you might only see a tiny bit of thickening of the pituitary stalk on a scan. Or the child may be thirsty. How many of you presented with thirst that was missed? Go on, put your hands up. Thirst can be the sign of a brain tumor. Growth failure can be the sign of a brain tumor. And Manuela Chaboni helped me publish the guidelines. What do you do with idiopathic, unexplained thirst or pituitary thickening? And if we don't understand what else of the midbrain hormones, these tumors also secrete hormones, and yet pituitary specialists are nowhere to be found at diagnosis. And we can't have enough time to get in there. And these are areas of the deep midbrain. So these are eye tumors, optic hypothalamic tumors, craniopharyngiomas, and pituitary adenomas, which affect the pituitary and above it. We've just produced guidelines for these two craniopharyngiomas with Dr. Gann was the lead author and many of you in this audience. And pituitary adenomas, my colleague, Professor Marta Corbinitz, has led that with us, who's a worldwide specialist in these tumors, also secrete hormones and disrupt life more in adults than in children. and she's been helping us at Great Ormond Street run a voluntary service called HPAT for the last 12 years. And 12 years ago, we were challenged by our neuro-oncology colleagues to produce some evidence that these tumours should be specially commissioned and have dedicated services the way they have existed in adult life for decades, and to provide evidence, because they only affect 10 to 15 children a year in the UK. So there is no evidence. So we had to garner what we could and provide expert opinion across the UK, worldwide. 150 professionals gave their time for free. Lots of interprofessional agreement. They've been adopted by the Children's Cancer and Leukemia Group, and they've been endorsed by the Royal College of Child Health. And it's taken 12 years. But I don't think we can ignore the fact that they now set a new standard of care against which best practice might be judged, and we'd like to see them properly commissioned. And the same tumour, when it's in the hypothalamus, as opposed to anywhere else in the brain, is really difficult. And you will see in this study, again with Dr. Chaboni, that it's taken us 40 years to get the data. And I hope this study has woken people up to the fact that these tumours, although they're low grade, when they occur in children under 3, and these are 90 children under 3, followed over 40 years, so it takes a long time, in a service that I and my prof before me have been doing across Great Ormond Street and University College. You can see that their survival rate is very high, 90%, with a huge fall-off once they leave pediatric practice. And they do funny things. These tumours come and go on their own. And you can see that despite the worry that radiotherapy would harm these children's outcomes, we've been giving recurring chemotherapy, experimental after experimental trial, up to 7 different types of new drug agents over the whole child's growing life. And you can see that the tumour keeps coming back. That's the progression-free survival in the solid, and it grows through it, and the endocrine and neurobehavioral outcomes fall off with it. So age and location matter. And what you see, which is fascinating for the first time, is that these children present with a wasting syndrome. You can't get weight on them. They have lots of hormone, growth hormone, and precocious puberty at 2 or 3. And then if you follow them over time, they lose it. They become growth hormone deficient. They become pubertally unable to maintain pubertal and sexual function, and they become obese. And you don't see it unless you follow them through. And it has nothing to do with radiotherapy or chemotherapy. It has to do with where the tumour is in the brain. And I want to thank Monica, who's one of the parents who helped me produce these diagrams, which I found very useful in the clinic and are on our website now, and I hope we can encourage other professionals to use them, to show why the outcome that you get depends on where the tumour is, not how malignant it is, and not what treatment you've had as much as that. And you can see that if you have it on the periphery, you're more likely to get strokes, you're more likely to get seizures, you're more likely to have speech and language problems. If it's in the back of the brain, you'll have incoordination, you'll have imbalance. If it comes down into the brainstem, it's bringing everything together. And there are some very nasty tumours in there that we can't cure. But sometimes we do, and you will hear from 2 survivors this morning who were told they weren't going to live. And they deserve to have had the same rehabilitation now that they do live years on, as every child should have. And if you have it in the deep midbrain, it can affect, there's the pituitary adenoma, the craniopharyngioma, the pituitary stalk, and this develops as an outpouch from the mouth and grows up into the deep midbrain. And we've got surgeons here today who can not only operate from the top, but we've got pituitary surgeons who can access the pituitary from the nose endoscopic, minimally invasive surgery. And I believe those children with these tumours should have the same access that adults have had for decades with pituitary tumour specialists. And that's what we're calling for. And in case you're in any doubt about the hypothalamus, it's a gland. It's an endocrine organ. These are all endocrine tumours. They make hormones, they disrupt hormones, and it's the most primitive survival mechanism in our body. Even dinosaurs had this. The rest of our brains developed so that we can do all the clever things that other mammals and animals can't do. But this, everyone has to have to survive. And it controls, it's a signaling mechanism, it's a post office, and it can be disrupted from the very top all the way down. And you can either have the messages disrupted from the hypothalamus, or you can cut the pituitary stalk, or you can damage bits of the pituitary, or you can throw chemotherapy around the whole body, which will damage the target glands. And this is a signaling mechanism. If you have an outward message, if you're expecting a letter from Granny, it'll drop inside your door, you'll read it, and hopefully you'll reply. If you're not at home, the messages pour up inside the door. That's what happens when you've damaged the gland, the target gland. If the post office has gone on strike, you start shouting at the post office. And these are very difficult aspects to measure, and we need time to do that. And we can't get in with the rush to treat children to do and properly understand both the hormone aspects and the neurological aspects of injury. Don't take fright, but this is the slide that you've seen outside and that we want to think we're throwing out today. We've got professionals, we've got survivors, we want to refine this, but this is what we're proposing as a pathway. The lower one is the recovery pathway. This is particularly for midbrain tumors because everything in black already exists. That's the top decision-making team that is already funded. Everything in red is what we're proposing. And so everything on the lower pathway is the rehabilitation which doesn't exist. And we're saying that should be there. But we're also saying that for deep midbrain tumors, there should be more pituitary and neuroendocrine representation specialists at the diagnostic decision-making team when you first present, and that's in red. And if the tumor's in the pituitary, you get second step up to a pituitary specialist team that know about tumors like this, and the neuro-oncologist and neurosurgeon become collaborative and supportive, and we may need to offer bed space, for example. But we do need pituitary physicians to prepare these children for surgery, to run around them 24/7 to manage the crises that occur. And I can tell you it's scary. I've done it. And there isn't a single person who manages and sees the whole thing now that we're all working in teams, and to recover them afterwards. And I'm also suggesting that perhaps we should think there should be some dialogue between those teams where there's a very rare hypothalamic tumor, and then how they go on into adult life. In adulthood, adult transition, these young people are looked after by adult endocrinologists with no neurodisability specialists, and it's a general capture-all team for what we call late effects. But these are not late effects. They start with the injury, and brain tumors need a special team. So I don't think the road ahead will cost much more. Brainbow was is a specialist rehabilitation service that provides the basic occupational therapy, physiotherapy, neuropsychology support, educational support at Cambridge, which was funded for 10 years by 3 charities. And why it's taken so long for the NHS Trust to buy it is an interest. They'll pour money into services, but not into chronic care. And it costs about $2,000 a child per year to rehabilitate those 170. And that's against having somebody to support your brain injury, somebody to support your access to work, the lost household income in caring for a disabled child, which are far more. And if you do successfully manage to bring a delayed diagnosis to a medico-legal negligence claim, as I'm increasingly doing, a complex care package for a very disabled child costs millions, but it works. And the NHS medico-legal negligence bill now stands at 120 billion. And it's doubled in the last 5 years. And a proportion of them are brain injury, brain tumour, cerebral palsy cases. So it's not true that the NHS hasn't got the money. We need to stop it being sent this way. So I'll conclude by saying I don't think survival is the right measure. The quality of life, and we need some good health outcomes, particularly with it being so stable. But if every child with a brain tumour, and that includes the 20% we don't cure, has access to a rehabilitative pathway which looks after the whole child from the beginning, during and beyond cure, and parallel plans for the recovery, then we will be helping each child regain their own potential, checking that our treatment plans are working and rehabilitating along them, and we will be able to judge what is due to the treatment and what is due to the tumour and what is due to the lack of rehabilitation. And we need the right health outcomes, not just survival. We need equity of treatment for children with rare tumours. And I don't think every single child with a rare tumour should go on the same cancer trial, just that we can increase the survival rate by 3% for the short term and maybe increase the toxicity. We need more choice. We need to collaborate, to think about how we can help these children, and we need to hear from the survivors themselves. And I'm going to finish there, and I would like you to think about that, but I would like to invite our colleague Daniel Bell from the Great Ormond Street Survivorship Service for Brain Tumours that has been sort of reframed for 2 years, and I'm delighted that they've worked with us, and Success has commissioned this gap analysis study. He's only just started in November, but we felt it was important to showcase what we're trying to do and encourage others to come forward, because what we'd like to do is mimic this throughout the country so that we can see where the gaps are. We don't want stars. We don't want to put people, we want to help the NHS get this right. Thank you.